Composition of a Killer fans. Dr. Cassidy here. Today we're going to be talking about Harvey Robinson, Harvey Miguel Robinson. This is a continuation of our series on juvenile serial killers, and he appears in almost every list. You can look up all kinds of these lists, juvenile offenders, juvenile killers, juvenile serial killers, and he's usually in the top 10 of all of those. Now, before we begin, as always, keep in mind that what we discuss here is not to be considered a clinical diagnosis of any kind. And let's get started. So, Harvey Robinson, he committed his crimes when he was 17 years old in the span of 11 months. 8 of those months was spent in prison. He was arrested for something else. So it is believed that he would have killed many, many, many more people had he not been, intercepted, prior to his, he was released after 8 months, and he picked right back up and started killing again. So in under a year, he raped and murdered 3 women. He received the death penalty for all the crimes, but 2 of those sentences were overturned to life in prison, and one, of course, is still, he's still on death row for. So we'll talk about that in detail in just a little bit. He was from Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was also known as the Allentown Serial Killer. And he currently is the only person on death row in Allentown, or in Pennsylvania. He's not in Allentown now. But in Pennsylvania, to be on death row to have committed crimes as a juvenile serial killer. And honestly, of the many articles that I read about Harvey, almost every single one of them would say something like this. Like many juvenile offenders, Robinson's background seems tailor-made for his downfall. And what do you think they mean by that? Well, the people that we typically look at, the serial killers that we cover, the serial killers that we have yet to cover, almost all have that thread of commonality where they lived in a violent household. They were physically and emotionally abused. They saw abuse, experienced it. They weren't very popular in school. People didn't like them. People were afraid of them. So that's what we see here with Robinson. His father was an alcoholic, and he witnessed his father verbally and mentally and physically abusing his mother. And then she eventually left the family. She left her children to get away from him. So he was also mentally and physically abused by his father. And very, very early on in school, he showed signs of severe conduct disorder, and teachers quickly noted Robinson's inability to tell right from wrong and his severe distaste for authority. As his threats and outbursts intensified with age, both peers and authoritative figures began to fear him. So obviously, this was early on, and he was arrested when his first time being arrested, he was only 9 years old. So beginning before 9 years old, there were signs. There were signs that something wasn't right, that this was not going to go well. And so you have an ability, I believe we have an ability as an educator to make a difference with children like this, but we have to have the tools, and that's what we're trying to figure out, right? We need the proper tools, and we need to be able to say, this is what we can do to help this child. Furthermore, Robinson grew up with a strong admiration of his father, even though he was a violent person. His father was a Pottstown jazz musician who in 1963 was convicted of the brutal murder of a woman named Marlene E. Perez, which was his mistress at the time. His wife had already left. He was seeing Marlene, and he ended up killing her. Police reports from the crime said that Robinson's father had beaten the 27-year-old victim so badly that she was nearly unrecognizable. So for Robinson to admit that he admired his father after witnessing him treating his mother this way, and obviously he being a part of that, abuse and neglect and mental abuse throughout his childhood, in my opinion, I think that the last person you would admire would be the person who has put you through this. But in his case, he admired him. And if you have teachers saying he showed signs of severe conduct disorder and he had an inability to tell right from wrong, huge red flag. Huge red flag. As a matter of fact, we talked about this in the last podcast. One of the main question that jurors and a judge are asked to consider is, does this person have the capability or the ability to understand right from wrong? And if they don't have that ability, then likely they won't get the death penalty. In juvenile cases, likely they'll be sentenced to stay in a juvenile facility until they turn 18, or they will go to a mental institution where they will stay until they're 18. And then some adults actually stay in the mental institution until their death. But it's that single question, does he know right from wrong? And at 17, when he was caught, it was deemed that he did understand right from wrong. So 30 years later, after his father killed Marlene Perez, Harvey began his killing spree. In 93, he spotted his first victim, Joan Burgart, undressing before bed in her apartment window. After a neighbor called police to complain about Burgart leaving her stereo on for 3 days and 3 nights, police discovered the 29-year-old's body, raped and brutally murdered. Police noted that her bedroom screen window was also missing. The police frantically searched for the killer, not knowing that they were already holding him in custody for completely unrelated charges. Robinson then slipped under the radar and was back on the streets to commit more carnage in no time. So that's part of that unfortunate scenario where he was actually in jail and they could have prevented him from killing his next victim and punished him for killing his first victim. But as happens so often, he slipped under the radar and was back on the streets. And that's part of that breakdown in the justice system that I talk about a lot. That's part of that, we talk about child services, not being as thorough as it should be. We talk about educators, people in education, that includes me, who have not been diligent in trying to get help for these children who are so disturbed. It's getting better. I'm not dogging anybody. It's getting better because we're becoming aware of these things. One of the reasons for this podcast is to create awareness, to help people understand that we can't do it alone. We have to do it, as a team. We have to figure out what it is best we can do for this child and prevent these things from happening. And it's going to be an ongoing, goal, I think, for all of us. But if we can make a difference in that one child, we could save hundreds of lives. I mean, it's that serious. So his next victim was a 15-year-old newspaper carrier named Charlotte Schmoyer. On the morning of June the 9th of 93, people began scanning the streets when they woke up and did not find newspapers on their doorsteps. One client, however, found Schmoyer's paper cart abandoned next to her bike. Soon enough, residents called the police, who found Schmoyer's radio headset dropped in between 2 neighboring houses, along with enough finger streaks on the window panes of a nearby garage to hint at a struggle. These details offered police enough evidence to conclude that Schmoyer had been abducted. The resulting search party did not take long to find blood, a shoe, and finally the battered young body of Schmoyer, stuffed haphazardly under a stack of logs. An autopsy report would later go on to show that she had been stabbed at least 22 times, raped repeatedly with her throat slashed in obvious overkill. And I'm going to make the assumption that you know what overkill is, but I'm also going to give you the legal definition. Overkill is when one or more of those 22 stabbings would kill that girl. The rape wouldn't have killed her, but one of these stabbings likely would have killed her. But then he continued this brutality by slashing her throat, and they consider that overkill. There's no way when someone commits this overkill, there's no argument such as this was a passion killing, this was not planned out, this was unexpected. Typically when you have overkill, this is a well thought out, well planned event, and the perpetrator becomes so involved in what they're doing that they overkill. And that's what we have here with Harvey. This gruesome teenage murder streak didn't end there. His third victim was a 47-year-old grandmother, Jessica Jean Fortney, who he sexually assaulted before strangling to death the month after killing Schmoyer. Robinson had one other known victim, and she was only 5 years old. After stalking her mother for days, Robinson broke into the child's home, where he raped and choked her before leaving her for dead. But she didn't die. And then finally, his fourth victim would finally lead to his capture. That was Denise Sam Calley, and she escaped Robinson's initial attack and agreed to allow the police to use her as bait. Now, this would not happen if she had been underage. They may have done this in the past, but in today's world, we don't use children as bait. You might even watch that show on TV where they're trying to find the pedophiles, and they have a woman who looks like a teenager, and she poses on the internet as a teenager and tries to help them capture these pedophiles who are trying to meet up with young girls and young men who are underage. And so you've got this adult who agrees to do this, and that tactic is very successful in most cases, because most violent offenders want that person dead or so incapacitated that they can't identify them. And so if Robinson had left someone alive, it was just a matter of time before he would have been caught, and he knew that. So that's how they used her as bait. He returned to her home several nights later to presumably finish off the job, but an officer was there to meet him. Robinson, who broke in through the window, and the officer exchanged gunfire before he fled the scene by crashing through a glass window. After the shootout, police apprehended Robinson at a local hospital where he had gone to seek treatment for his wounds. And I say that's a funny thing, but not funny as in, funny. This is an unusual thing. Most people would know that if you're involved in a crime and you get hurt, you would never want to go to a hospital, because that's one of the first places that police look. They call these hospitals, all the area hospitals, and they say, be on the lookout for this person. They may come in with a wound from a gun, from a bullet, and this is their description. And as soon as that person goes into the emergency room, they get arrested. Now, they may be treated while they're there, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is, most smart people would not go to